I don't know if everybody can hear that. Good evening. I will call this meeting of the Stratford Board of Education Finance Committee to order. My name is Amy Wiltsey. Today is Tuesday, September 26th, and we have a quorum. Thank you all for joining us. And first on our agenda is our acceptance of minutes from our August 28th meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve these minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Cupie. Second by Ms. Carol Fabian. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining. Thank you so much. Second on our agenda is our discussion. First, we've got a budget transfer. So I will read it and then we will vote to have discussion. Total budget transfer amount is $302,750. This budget transfer is savings from students returning from outplacement used to cover paraprofessional and tutor needs. Related benefits are included in this transfer. I will entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, and thank you. Okay. Ms. Mangini, would you please talk a little bit more, and then we'll entertain some questions?
Certainly. The request before you, it comes from our Pupil Personnel Service Director. However, it is as a result of a few students being returned from outplacements to be within the school district this year, and as a result, our needs for supports has increased. So this request is to repurpose the dollars that are saved through tuition into accounts to fund those additional positions that we'll need, such as paraprofessionals and tutors.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Mangini with regard to this budget transfer? Okay, wonderful. I will take a roll call.
Amy?
Yep. I can see this.
Just a quick question. I thought I saw it somewhere, but I can't find it now. How many students were returned to the district?
Right now.
3. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other additional questions?
Yeah.
Mr. Henry?
So, is this the total number of dollars we've saved from bringing kids back in district, or is there a different amount?
So it's not total, we brought many kids back. You know, when we started, we were going to,
Thank you.
I don't know if you guys remember, but when we started, we had well over 110 out-of-district placements. We are now down to 85. So what you're seeing now is a result of moving from 89 down to 85 for this school year during the month of September.
Do you know the total amount? You said we're down to 85?
I can get you that total
Okay.
amount. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay. It's great that you've been able to do this and that we've done it. And I probably put another money, but I know you've had some creative ideas along the way. I don't know how much money you've saved this district by some of that creativity and thinking outside the box, but I just, I say thank you, and I'm sure you don't know the number off the top of your head, but.
I will get you guys the number over the past 2 years.
Okay, all right, yeah, just, district-wide, how you've, maybe you can detail out, some of the programs you've implemented that have created savings, for the district.
And more exciting, it's included kids in our current programs that otherwise wouldn't have been able to.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate the transfer so that we can have the support services in place to be able to include the kids.
Well, and the great part is that the more we save, the more we can spend in other areas, so it's a win-win for all the kids, so I just, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Borges. Were there any other questions for Ms. Borges or Mrs. Mangini with regard to this budget transfer? Okay, seeing none, we will do a roll call vote. Ms. Lance?
Yes.
Ms. Cupie?
Yes.
Ms. Carol Fabian?
Yes.
Ms. Corcoran?
Yes.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Mrs. Vidal?
Yes.
Mr. Henrik?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you all very much. Next, we've got financial reports. So we will begin with Mrs. Mangini on fiscal year 22-23.
Yes, we did provide you with the final report for June 30th. Of course, it is unaudited, and there are some additional town adjusting entries that we are waiting to have finalized. But at the moment, you will see that the balance is $2,030,359. And as noted in my memo, and as noted all throughout the fiscal year last year, the primary drivers really remained consistent, and they are salaries and benefits. That's been a result of our issues with filling positions last year, transiency between positions, meaning that we've had people who have kind of come and go, but what has really impacted us are positions that perhaps were unfilled for a period of time and positions that perhaps were filled at a lower salary or higher. So there is that delta there. And also we had a significant challenge, as you will recall, in acquiring and filling sub positions, both teacher subs as well as clerical subs. So for all those reasons, that resulted in that year-end balance, and I think you probably got some information out of the memo I provided you as well. So I'm happy to address any questions you might have.
Questions for Mrs. Mangini? Mr. Henrik?
So, earlier in the year, we transferred about $1 million worth of surpluses to cover some of our not budgeted costs, but some of our district needs or district wants. So that puts us at about $3 million, in addition to the $2.5 million that the council cut out. So in essence, we overestimated our cost this year about $5.5 million. Knowing that there's sides of a budget, and I had suggested at one point that perhaps we talk to the town about encumbering some of that money to help offset our upcoming expenses to change our reading program, our state mandated change. Is there any way that we can, like on a month-to-month basis, take a closer look at some of these budget items? So again, I've said it before, I don't think that the board should waste a nickel, but I don't also think that the board should have a surplus. Is there a way we can, on a monthly basis, look at some of these allocations and be a little proactive in our estimation of surpluses, because we have them every year, but spend them it's either A, there are needs or there aren't needs, and if we're not spending the dollars, then it's obvious that there isn't a need. So if there is a need, and every year we through budget season, we go through the whole rigmarole, fully fund the Board of Ed, fully fund the Board of Ed. Well, if we took $5.5 million off our original estimate, that would have been fully funding the Board of Ed. So, but if we want to fully fund the Board of Ed or create a better environment, can we proactively look at our potential surpluses to spend those in areas where we might have a need? Or every year are we going to go through the same thing and constantly say we need more money and then give more money back to the council?
I'd be happy to address those questions.
Thank you. Ms.
First,
Murphy.
I frankly don't agree that we overestimated by $5 million. We had a reduction to our budget request, and as a result, we reduced positions to be properly allocating within the town-approved appropriation. Yes, we did have potentially $3 million remaining, which is about a 2.5% year-end balance, a little bit higher than we've had in past years, but nevertheless, we still budget it with 97.5% accuracy. And when you have a budget that is over 75% personnel and both salaries and benefit costs, it's really difficult to estimate exactly where you're going to be at any point in time. We do our best in looking through positions that are unfilled and what potentially that could result in as far as a year-end balance. But we can't take that entire amount. Each month I come to you, and each month it grows a little bit if those positions are not filled. And we assume they're going to be filled by the following month. So the savings that we bring to you on that month is that savings for that month. A couple of things I think you have to just keep in mind as you look through the board's budget is, one, we absolutely have to budget for every position that the board has approved, and that's what we do. Secondly, we take some very educated guesses on a lot of the variables in our budget, and I often like to point out health insurance. If we had every employee who is entitled to take our health insurance, if we budgeted for every single one of those individuals, we could easily be adding $1 million to our budget without a shadow of a doubt. What we do is look at the historical trends, and we do budget a little bit for potentially people having qualifying events throughout the year where they can in fact be added on. Perhaps one of our younger teachers having a family, and now they're going from a two-person to a family plan, and that costs the district additional monies. So there's a lot of variables in the board budget, and there are on the town side as well, but it's not as driven by personnel because we do have such a high percentage. And also, there aren't the types of steps in any of the other unions throughout the town side of government. They do have steps, but certainly not with the differences as teachers. As you know, a top teacher could be making $114,000, and we could hire someone at $50,000. So there could be a significant savings. And to be honest, we do a breakdown in a spreadsheet. We check it monthly, and that's exactly what happened last year, and the year before, and the year before that. And it's a national issue right now with everyone struggling to fill positions. And I hope that's going to improve. I think we started the year off a lot better this year. But again, we do exactly what Mr. Henrik is suggesting, and we bring it to you every month. And yes, I'm always going to be conservative about coming to the board and say, spend this money, because I am concerned in November, December, January about our special ed, about other areas of the budget. How is the winter going to be? Did we budget enough for our heating costs? So there's a lot of variables we have to look at before we jump, and I will never guide this board to just spend money to spend money. I think that's foolish. I think that's really not best practice, and I think it's unfair to our taxpayers.
No, but again, what would have been fair to our taxpayers is not to request an extra $3 million because they're on the hook for that $3 million. But year after year, we have surplus after surplus, and I'm just saying, maybe we can figure out a better system throughout the year to analyze our expenditures, so at the end of the year, we don't come up with such large surpluses. And, I mean, next year, if we start out asking for a 0% increase over this year's budget, that's a $3 million increase over this year's spending, right off the bat, if we just ask for 0. So, it's got to be a better way. This doesn't seem to be working well, so.
I think the best way, quite frankly, is for us to remember that every dime that we do not spend goes back to the town of Stratford. And perhaps what can happen is that money should be set aside for the Board of Ed so that there isn't an additional increase. So there are other ways of looking at it.
Thank you, Mrs. Mangini. I was just going to piggyback on Mr. Henrik. and I appreciate you adding where the surplus does go. Has there been any conversation with town leaders about earmarking this surplus for future expenditures?
Not yet, however, the board would have to make a formal motion for us to request that the funding, perhaps part of it at least, go into the Education Reserve Fund.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. Also, if I may, do you have a question? Okay. I have a few questions with regard to Mr. Henrich's statements. It's great to have a surplus, because if you send someone to the store and they come back with change, that's something we celebrate. However, I would like to hear from Courtney, Ms. Daniels, and Ms. Borges, if possible. These savings that some might celebrate have affected our programs, our staff, our classrooms. Can we talk a little bit about what that looked like to have an unfilled position? Did we lose staff because we overworked? Did we include doubling size of classes and impact the learning of our students? Is anyone willing to just take a stab at what not filling these positions looked like for our school system?
Please use the microphone.
So last year started off a little different than this year. So we had a lot of people resigning throughout September and October, and those positions were difficult to fill. So we had a lot more teaching positions that were vacant throughout the year at different times of the year, and we were filling those by asking teachers to maybe step in and teach a 6th class, which maybe isn't as costly, and we just don't have the subs to fill. So those positions were left vacant for longer than they would typically be in a year.
Thank you. As a parent of a student who was in one of those classes with a teacher that never came, I can personally say that learning was lost. So, Dr. Daniels, would you confirm with some of the shortage and how it impacted classrooms?
Good evening, everyone. So when we talk about shortages across all of our urban school districts, what we're experiencing, including here in Stratford, is a loss of learning. So teachers are delivering units at certain particular points in time, creating assessments to measure learning outcomes against targets so students can perform and ultimately become ready for post-secondary opportunities and readiness. So when there are gaps in learning because we're either unable to support with having a teacher in the classroom or there's a substitute teacher in that space, what ends up happening is there's a loss in learning and then it has impact on the performance outcomes. So I just wanted to name that because when we also have situations here in Stratford where we don't have teachers, we've seen some of our teachers really step up and try to take on additional classes as well, which is extremely difficult. And we saw that a lot last year with teachers that were like, I'm noticing that I'm missing, that these students are missing learning here, and then they end up trying to step in as best as they can to pretty much take on another course, whether they're not teaching it directly, but creating even materials or videos.
Thank you. I really appreciate your input
Madam
so
Chair.
that we can see the other side. Mr. Henrich?
Yeah, Ms. Vidal had a question? And go ahead. Go.
I was
Mrs. Vidal.
you can, I was just going to make a comment in general that I think, in seeing the loss of learning, clearly I've seen it with my own children, I've expressed it before, I've seen it with others, as well as the loss to the taxpayers. We're not assessing that $2 million or $3 million or $5 million, whatever it might be, we're not assessing that to the taxpayers and we're making them pay that in the beginning. So there's a little bit of loss on both sides. So I don't think Mr. Henrich is very far off in saying that there needs to be a better way to plan. There needs to be a better way to look at all of this as a larger picture because it's not benefiting either side.
Again, I'll just end with this unless there's other
Madam Chair, I
questions.
do have a comment.
Okay.
Question.
That's predicting human behavior, but hopefully we have a fortune teller amongst us. Mrs. Cupey.
Oh, so you did bring up basically what my question was going to be, and every time this, comes up, I consistently say, yes, we're looking at a number, right, that we're labeling as surplus, but our conversation should go deeper into what's behind that number. And I appreciate you bringing up Courtney and Dr. Daniels' to give a little bit of background, I also think we should be discussing more around how are we going about trying to fill those positions, understanding that it is having a negative impact on our student outcomes, that we as board members sit up here and complain about performance and, well, we don't agree with, this increase and that increase because our scores are still this and this. Like, we can't be on one hand arguing against increasing funding and on the other hand criticizing the outcome that we're generating from not funding our schools. Like, it's not logical. And I understand, the comments about, the expense to the taxpayers, but that's what the town council's job is, and that's why they argue with us so much about giving us an increase. Our job, however, is for the students. That's why we are the only body in charge of advocating for the students. So we fight and fight and fight for the money that we want, that we believe is needed to educate our kids, and then the council is going to do their job and determine whether or not they want to give that to us. But it's not for us to go and argue on behalf of the council to not request the money that we believe we need. We have these positions and we have to fund them. And then we need to talk about, okay, why aren't we filling them? What are we not doing, or what else could we do to actually fill the positions? That's where the discussion needs to be.
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Mr. Henry?
Yeah, I agree with Ms. Coopy 100%. We have funded these positions. The council last year, or for this budget we're talking about, reduced it by $2.5 million. We filled that gap by finding efficiencies through re-engineering. That, in my belief, is something we should have done to start the budget year, not after we were forced into a corner. And now we have a $3 million surplus in addition to that. We are funding those positions. The question is, what's not working? It's not the money that's the problem. It's what we're doing with the money and how we're doing it.
Sure.
If the children are lacking an education, it's not because of the funding of the council or of this board. What that answer is, I don't know. But I think if we have a surplus year after year, we need to take a look throughout the year and reallocate those funds at an earlier point in time so we can fill those gaps and provide a better educational opportunity for our students. Because our students are suffering for our inability to come up with better solutions than the ones we're doing now. I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you what we're doing isn't working. Year after year we have a surplus, and year after year we say we're not funding the children's education. But we are, because we have a surplus. So let's find a better way.
So if I may say a few words here, good evening to everybody. I really appreciate this conversation because I think it's important to bring to bear into everyone's attention that in many ways the school system is the sole entity within municipal space that is highly dependent on external factors, okay? Now, as I look out in the audience, I see a few of our teachers here. We are always going to budget around the personnel that we need. The conversations we're having as a school board, as a community about overcrowded classrooms, and to Ms. Wiltsey's point, whenever we have a reduction because there's a $2.5 million gap, it without a doubt impacts personnel because personnel is represented by 75% of our budget, and whenever personnel is impacted, it without a doubt impacts programs, right? We can all agree to that. Re-engineering and trying to find efficiencies is the foundation of our budget process, and Ms. Mangini has echoed that for a long time. And I'll point to a case in fact that for one of the first times in a long time, Stratford's Board of Education budget last year was a 3.9, which is one of the lowest in the region. If that is not a clear indication to our taxpayers, to our community, that this board and this administration and our finance committee went through a process of engineering to try to find efficiencies, I'm not certain there is any more of an indicator. Now, our ability to fill positions, particularly in the context of the Great Resignation and the depleted teacher pipeline, impacts all those dollars and cents that you see in the surplus lens, right? Now, additionally, and I'm excited for what we're going to discuss during the regular board meeting, we have some things to highlight. Our teachers have been doing remarkable work. Absolutely remarkable work. There are some things that are working, some things that this community should be extremely proud of, and we'll highlight that in the second half during our regular board meeting. But this process will never slow down because this Board of Education and this administration will remain committed to making sure that we put certified and qualified teachers in front of our students, and doing so with the fiscal responsibility of making sure we maximize taxpayer dollars and put out a great school system.
Thank you, Dr. Sunday. Ms. Kippy?
Question for Mrs. Mangini. Could you confirm if you used an example earlier saying if we had a position, let's say a teacher position at the high, 114,000, right? If that teacher leaves and we fill that position for 50K, when we do the budget the following year, you're using that 50K as the new number, correct? I just want to make sure.
Absolutely
Okay.
correct.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Henrik?
Yeah, just one last comment. And again, if we're saying funding, we are not properly funding the education system of our town, but we are giving back a surplus every year, the math doesn't add up. We have the money, but we're not spending it, so we can't do the things that we should be doing. Let's figure out a better way.
Ms. Kippy?
And to that point, last year we did that, right? Like we all as a board, worked with Ms. Mangini and approved a few things. They were one-offs, and like she said earlier, the issue that we have is that they are recurring expenses. Those we can't really use the surplus to fund, because while we could, fund things that are one-off, a lot of our needs are recurring. And so that's why we would want to give the money back to the town so that our taxpayers can benefit from it versus us making something up that we may that might not be really a need, because our needs are more recurring, not one-off, so.
Okay. Mrs. Mangini has her hand up.
I would just like to add that when we are looking to set the budget, obviously we are doing it with integrity, transparency, and we are looking at efficiencies throughout the year. We take, and I will say personally, take what I do very seriously. And we would never try to overtax our citizens as a result. And when we say that perhaps the town is not fully funding the Board of Ed to its request, what we're trying to express is that based on every position that we need funding for, because the board's approved it, we don't have enough based on that. When we have surpluses, again, please remember that when a town has a surplus, it's actually applauded. And all the bonding agencies will tell you that really good town budgeting, municipal budgeting, is having a surplus of 1 to 3%, because that means you really are trying to make your best guesstimates. And I will just finalize this conversation from my perspective by saying we will never allow our schools, and I see our principals here, and I'm sure they can tell you I am a pain sometimes about things, but we're always looking for the best price. We could easily spend out every dime by overpaying for paper towels and overpaying for soap. As long as I am here, I can assure you that will never happen. Again, what we do is with integrity, and if we can give money back to our taxpayers at the end of the year, unfortunately, this time around, it wasn't for a good reason, because we did not have the ability to fill positions. But I am not going to turn down a savings like we had in our retiree health insurance that we didn't know about until January, because that's the renewal, because we don't want to be potentially criticized for giving money back. That's never going to happen. So we'll take the hits if that's what we have to do, but I still feel very proud of the budgets that this board has put through and the way that we have managed them.
Thank you, Mrs. Mangini. While you're close to the mic. We will move to expenditures and encumbrances for fiscal year 23 and 24, please.
Okay, this one's a quick one, obviously. Your financial report is reflected through August. There isn't a whole lot to report at this point, but I will share with you, again, one of the variables that we deal with within the budget is that the town has a fixed price for diesel and regular gasoline, but it ends in October 31st. I've reached out to Mr. Ryan, and I have asked that not only we get a move on trying to lock in, because this is a variable in our budget, but I really hope that we can lock in through a budget year, because that would really be helpful to all our budgets, both on the town and the board side. So stay tuned. I'll let you know where we end up with that pricing.
Great. Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Mangini with regard to this year's school budget?
Just a quick question.
Mr. Henry.
In regards to the diesel, I think you've answered this question before, but we work hand in hand with the town in order to create that plan or price?
Yeah, economies of scale, so we try to bid out together with the volume of both the town and the Board of Ed.
Thank you.
Any other questions with regard to this item? Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Mangini. We will move now to grants update with Dr. Clemmie.
Good evening. It's early in the year, but your grant report has the numbers so far, at least as of August 31st. Of course, we'll answer any questions about that, but what I want to do first is explain that September is when everything gets really busy. So there's a lot of things that aren't reflected in this report yet because we don't put them on there until they're secured. So in September, we won a Right to Read grant, a dual credit grant for expanding our dual credit programs, a grant to partially pay for a mental health specialist, and our adult education grant was approved, and our Alliance grant was approved. So busy September in terms of things coming in. Grants in progress, Title I, Title II, Title III, and the state bilingual grant go in this week. Title IV is due in late October, and we're looking at the state's second HVAC grant. They have another one out, like the one we're using for the flood chillers. And we're in contact with the town, and we're discussing what projects might fit. And of course, it's a matching grant, so whether the matching funds might be available from the town. And lastly, we have a grant in waiting, which we've already submitted the Parents Trust Fund grant that funds the Parent C program, and we're waiting to hear back from the state on that result.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Clemmie. Are there any questions with regard to grants?
I do.
Mrs. Cupie.
Question. So with the matching, the portion that the town is funding, what fund does that come out of? Is it the general or is it the capital improvement? If the town matched a grant like the HVAC?
That would be up to the town. We don't have any control over that.
I guess where I was going is so a surplus from the BOE may actually help to support that, right?
If the town so chooses, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Cupie. Any other questions for Dr. Clemmie? Okay, thank you very much. We will move now to Ms. Borges in our special ed PPS report.
Good evening, everyone. I said that I would have some real numbers now that we're into the season, and I'm actually going to give you an update. So you know our number of students with exceptionalities changes on a day-to-day basis. We are starting this year with 1,275, which is greater than the number you have in the report that was given to you on the day that I wrote that report. That's updated from today. I will try to make sure that I keep all of you up to date on the different variances that might drive our budgetary needs for our students with exceptionalities. So within that write-up now, I'm giving you the amount of hours that need to be delivered from our PPS staff so that you will know and understand as those increase. That might be why we need to contract services or get additional supports in order to meet the needs of the students, as well as to let you know the amount of triennial evaluations as well as initial evaluations that we are going to incur this year. So we have seen an increase in our students. So last year, just to keep you on track, we started with around 1,200 students that had IEPs. And now we are starting with 1,275. Other than that, everything in the budget sheet is tracking on schedule as we expected, but I'm going to try to make sure that little blurb up there keeps you up to date on the changes in the services we need to provide.
Are there any questions for Ms. Borges with regard to her report? I can't see hands. Mrs. Bedell.
In your report, you mentioned that there's whole lot of hours being met by the special education team, and I really appreciate that. Are we meeting the hours required by the students in the
We are.
district? We are. For tiered students, for IEPs, for 504s, all of the above?
So 504s run out of the Teaching and Learning Office. The hours that I provided you are specifically to students with exceptionalities who have IEPs. CT sets can run reports now. That's why I got excited to give you guys some actual data.
No, I appreciate it. Has there ever been a time when we're not meeting hours?
If you guys remember, last year, we asked you for a pretty significant budget transfer. Because we weren't able to fill positions, we ended up owing compensatory hours. So when you ask the question if there's ever a time where we aren't able to meet hours, there's never an official time because we will still owe those. Those are on a legal document, so we will still need to make sure our students are provided with that time. So at the end of, in the spring of last year, I asked you for a sizable transfer to cover compensatory hours from the positions we didn't fill in the fall.
Did that answer your question, Mr. Stowe? Mr. Henry?
Yeah, so in our special ed transportation, we've encumbered, expended about 2/3 of that line item. Is that because we're charged throughout the year, or it's early in the year, so with 2/3 being gone, is that typical, or?
Yeah, so transportation, we do try to encumber everything, but it does change. So for example, I know we needed to add a couple of extra small buses to our preschool because our numbers went up. So next month, you'll see that go down further because we had to add more transportation. So as our transportation needs increase, we do add some, but for the most part, starting at the year, we try to encumber for the year.
And then, I mean, you're up here, so I might as well ask you this question. I know we recently moved, I think, the adult ed over to Honey Spot School from Birdseye. Does that, so I'm guessing, and maybe you can explain, but does that create a vacancy in that school or a usage gap in that school where continuing ed was?
No, so at Birdseye, we house our Strive program. There's 27 students that are currently in Strive, and because they changed the age that we need to continue to educate students until age 23, we won't have students graduating from that program, but we will be adding between 7 and 9 more. So that is a full program that runs during the day for our transition students until age 23. So continuing ed runs in the evening, as it always has. So that building during the school day is still used by our Strive program, in full.
But the evening, the continuing ed won't be housed in there any longer?
They will be moving to AIP once the building is prepared.
Okay. And then, so do we have a need for, or a use for that continuing ed, or is it something we should?
Well, we definitely need continuing ed, so
Yeah, no,
that's
but I
going to
mean-
go to AIP. That's a very useful program.
Sure.
And there's always needs that our district can fill, but that's a question that, we would need to put a committee together to talk about what we would like to do with that open time.
Okay. So it's typically what, 3 o'clock on, or?
I believe continuing ed starts at 2:30 and runs until about 9 p.m.
And I mean, do we, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think we have any other, outside of continuing ed, any other programs that run,
At Birdseye, no, we do not.
or anywhere throughout the district that we could be housed there, or is it just now the continuing ed is gone, we no longer need that space?
Again, I think that's probably a further discussion with, a group of people as we get the shifts. Continuing ed hasn't officially moved yet because the building, we're just finishing it up.
Okay. All right, well, so continuing ed has moved over to Honey Spot. And I know we did a significant amount of work to the inside. What is it, I know Mr. Ruggiero, maybe, I don't see him here, but maybe you can answer it at the next meeting, but the condition of the...
Mr. Henry, it's a not special ed question. I think Ms. Borges is prepared to answer at the mic, so maybe we can direct it to the responsible party,
I have a question.
To the what?
to the person who can answer. I'm sorry, Mrs. Borges, did you want to take it on?
I think that
But I
is
have a
likely to
question.
come up during the regular meeting.
Okay, so I can ask it then. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Ms. Cupie does have a question for you.
Sorry, so going back to the question about special ed transportation, and maybe I misunderstood what you were saying. I'm curious, you said you've had to add some additional small buses, so should this number be an indication that we might go over budget later on in the year for transportation?
Not at this point in time. We're tracking on budget.
We're trying,
There's-
even with the addition of those?
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make
Yes,
sure.
there's always a little up and down, but
Okay.
right now, from what I can tell at the beginning of the school year, we are tracking on budget.
Okay, great. I just wanted to get a sense of whether that's going to be kind of an indication, so thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Borges? Thank you. Okay, Mrs. Mangini, food services report, please.
Yes, you have the food service report for June, and again, it's always my pleasure these days to provide this information. We are still at a very healthy balance. We're also required by the state to provide a year end, and as you may recall, we're only allowed to keep up to 3 months of operating expenses in our fund balance. So once we identify through that state report that we do in fact have a surplus beyond that amount, we have to provide a spending plan. And we did that last year, and we did it again this year. And again, it's simply a matter of replacing some really antiquated equipment. I think we're really getting in a very good place. Some of the items that we are looking to do are including ovens and some new cafeteria tables and chairs, and we're just waiting for the state to approve that. So stay tuned.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Mangini with regards to food services? Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Mangini, would you please now report on enrollment and registration?
Enrollment, again, we are waiting for the October 1st official numbers, but we are trending pretty much on track with where we were last year. We were a little bit lower in October, and we did end up with higher numbers by June. But we are in pretty good shape. Registration really ran okay this year, despite some of the grumblings we heard, quite honestly, in the past. We were challenged even more in the area of registrations. We've really made some strides in streamlining the entire process, and as some of you may be aware, and some in the public as well, we have kind of what might be considered a two-step system, and we did a little bit more studies with Power School to see what our options were, because basically a parent goes into the system, starts the process, and has to wait for an email to be allowed to get into the portal to upload documents that we require. And what's happening is they're either going into spam, and people think they're not being addressed or not being responded to, and it's creating a lot of angst. So we are looking at a new software program. Mr. Rivers and I have been on a couple of meetings with Power School, with another one tomorrow morning. So hopefully their newer program will eliminate that step and will streamline registration even further. So we're in good shape.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Mangini with regard to enrollment and registration? Okay. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn this month's Finance Committee meeting. So moved by Ms. Carol
Second.
Fagan, second by Ms. Cupie. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.